Hello, everybody. Welcome to Meet the PhDs episode. And today we have Summer joining us. Hi, Summer. Thanks for joining.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you here. And she's joining us from the University of East Anglia, Norwich, from the Department of Pharmacy. So thanks, Summer, again. And I'll quickly ask you a couple of questions based on your department, your field of study, and also about your interest in research. And then slowly in other parts of this episode, we will go and discuss topics like mental health and how PhD affects your private life, and what are the tips that you will be giving to the new prospective PhD students. So let's do this. And I'll ask you the first question here is that in which field and department you're pursuing your PhD in, which we have briefly told the participants, but it'll be nice to hear from you. And also, what is the research question that you're trying to answer in your PhD?
Yeah, so I'm at UEA in the pharmacy department, and I study an alternative DNA structure, which is called the eye motif. So I'm actually looking to identify eye motif specific probes, because this will enable us to start studying what they're doing in cells, not just in normal states, but also disease states. This is really important because they're likely involved in regulating transcription. So we also think they're linked to various diseases, having roles in things like cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. So it's really important that we can understand what they're doing.
Okay. And as you mentioned that they are important in several diseases. So are you targeting a specific disease in your PhD?
For me, I'm looking at the eye motif that forms in the c-Myc promoter region. So c-Myc is dysregulated in around over 75% of cancers. So for me, I am looking more towards the cancer one myself, but between colleagues, it does differ.
Okay, yeah. So why did you choose this field, and what was the moment like when you decided to pursue your PhD in this field?
Yeah, so I don't remember the exact moment I found this particular PhD, but I was sort of going through find a PhD. I'd been looking at loads of PhDs for a while and been like, oh, I don't like any of them. And then I just found this one by mistake. It was totally different to everything else I was looking at. And that's when I realized I'd been looking in the wrong area. And I just found the idea of these alternative DNA structures, their role in transcriptional regulation, really interesting. And I really love figuring out how molecules actually function. And the fact that they have the potential to be really powerful drug targets really highlighted that this is an essential area of research for me. And I did think the work could pave the way to improve therapeutics, which I found quite important as for myself, really.
Oh, that's interesting. So do you like research in general, and what sparked your interest in research?
Yeah, so I am quite hot and cold with actually being in the lab. Since COVID, because I was out of the lab for a good 3 months, I've really enjoyed going back to the lab. It might also have something to do with that I'm coming towards the end of my PhD, so a lot of my stuff is working at the moment, touch wood, hopefully that doesn't jinx the rest of it. But when it isn't working, you can feel really defeated and really struggle with that. But in general, I enjoy piecing parts of the puzzles together. But I am beginning to realize I do prefer certain aspects of the research career more than the lab work. For example, sort of carrying out different conversations and science communication that I've had the opportunity to do.
Wow. And would you just like to tell us more about the type of science communication that you're involved in? Because that'll be interesting to know. Yeah, I'm curious to know, actually.
Yeah, so I've done a few, I was organising a scientific conference, which unfortunately had to be cancelled. And I was working with Pint of Science, and they're looking to do some things online, which I'm hoping to be involved in. I'm also trying to design a board game around DNA structures for children, so young students really, probably up to about 18. But I'm sure adults will find it fun too, hopefully. And with the Global Science Show on Twitter, so I've participated in that, where I've made an explanation video on what is DNA, and also did an experiment to get DNA out of strawberries, which was really good fun.
Oh, nice. It'll be interesting to put the link of that in in our episode so that people can see what you're doing
Yeah,
there.
that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this is interesting. Just let us know so what your career trajectory has been up until now. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was around 16, so doing my GCSEs, I was actually doing a part-time job on a Saturday working in the hairdressers. I generally swept hair and made teas. Got to talk on the phone and gossip with the customers, so quite enjoyed that. And then I was a cleaner throughout my A-level studies. Throughout my undergraduate degree, I was a banquet and conference in waitress. So I worked in hotel management for a while. And then I started to take a few more jobs more relevant. So I started to do some outreach. I did an outreach placement where I did STEM work. I also undertook a summer lab placement where I looked at the circadian rhythms in plants. And I also did a year's placement during my undergraduate degree at GSK where I worked as a bioanalyst. And I'm currently still a STEM ambassador and have been doing spectroscopy in a suitcase for the Royal Society of Chemistry, which I've continued both into my PhD, but started as an undergrad.
Wow, that's a very interesting thing. And I mean, I'm so glad that you're continuing that because with a PhD, you have increased workload and it's hard to manage. But I'm sure you're very passionate about it, and that's why you're able to continue that.
Yeah, I probably do a few less than I did when I was an undergraduate, but I always try and fit them in. I do. It's really enjoyable. I think when you get to work with the kids, they're so excited as well. It's really nice.
Yeah, and I think for them also it's nice to know somebody who's still young and who's still passionate about science. I mean, that's what they want to know and they want to grow up as, right?
Yeah.
So somebody to look forward to. Yeah. Okay. So the next question would be that what is your typical day as a PhD student? So what are the tasks that you do in your day and how does your day look like in your PhD? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess my days change quite a lot. They're really quite varied. I have the flexibility to organize my day myself. I get to pick which sort of hours I like to come in. So I like to start at 9:30 because I'm really not a big fan of mornings. So I just stay a bit later. Generally, on a Monday, I plan out my week and decide what I'm going to actually experiments to run. We also have group meeting. So I meet with everyone else in my group. We'll discuss what's going right, wrongs with our projects and like where to go to next. So that's always really useful, helpful to get their input. But generally, I'll spend a lot of time in the lab because I'm a lab-based project. I like to try and set my longer experiments that don't need me to physically be there on up in the morning so I can run the experiments that are more hands-on in between it so that I've just, I guess, used my time more effectively or at least do some analysis during that period where I don't need to be in the lab.
Yeah. This is one thing that I have also observed when I had the opportunity to do some molecular experiments during my undergrads and like was working in a lab also. So at that point of time, I really realized that it's so important when you know how to plan well and organize your stuff so that you prepare well before the experiment starts so that you don't waste the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And also at the same time you know when to pipe it and like if you're running ELISA you should know when to like I mean how many washes you need to give
Yeah.
to your sample. And yeah, I mean the whole thing is yeah, it requires a lot of planning and organization. So that's what I thought was one skill that is non-academic but you still need to
Yeah.
have an academic
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll find as you sort of come along with more experience and once you get used to the experiments you're doing, it's much easier because you become quicker at them. You know what you're doing, so it's easier to line them up and you know exactly how long it takes you. If I've got something new I'm doing, I'll probably just give myself all morning just to do that. I won't try and put anything else around it because if something does go wrong or I forget something, the pressure to then rush is more likely to make me mess something up. So I'm like, this is just to do this. I'll take it nice and slowly till I'm ready to be a bit quicker with it. Always, it's worked best for me from a trial and error.
Yeah, trial and error, true. Okay. So we're talking about a typical day, but definitely, like as human beings, we really need support from the others, be it friends, family. So, what sort of a support do you seek from your friends and family who are not from an academic background?
Yeah, so a lot of my friends and family aren't from an academic background.
Mhm.
I do turn to them with stress from particular experiments or just being a PhD student in general. So I'm really grateful for all of their support, to be honest with you. But pretty much anything work related, I go to them. Generally, I just need to vent most of the time. You just need someone to listen and support, which is great because sometimes when you do kind of just need to vent and you go to a colleague or someone else who's academic, sometimes they just start throwing ideas and stuff at you, which you're not quite ready for yet. Sometimes you need to vent and process how you're feeling first before you can be in a logical mindset. At least for me, I find that anyways. So that's really useful because they don't bombard me with logic and, well, why haven't you done this? I'm like, okay, I didn't think of that. Fine. They're just very supportive in the moment.
Some
Um,
sympathy.
yeah, they're like, oh, you poor thing. I'm like, yeah, it's really difficult. So they're just lovely and supportive. And they're also really great for when you're trying to do science communication to the general public. So I always send them my diagrams and they check that my work isn't filled with academic jargon and that it does come across to the correct audience. So they are fabulous for doing that with. Don't overlook your non-academic friends. They will become essential to things that you do as well.
A very important advice, I guess. Yeah. Thanks. um, so, how many places did you apply for before getting accepted into this particular PhD position?
Yeah, so I applied for my current PhD and two others at the same time.
Mhm.
The other two were rotational type PhDs, which I ended up not being asked to interview for those two. Then I had the interview for this one, and then I took this one, so I didn't apply for any more.
Okay. Okay. And how was your PhD interview like? So
Yeah,
for this.
so for this one, yeah, so I had two interviews. I had one initially with both of my supervisors. That was quite relaxed. It was over Skype. We went over what I did as an undergraduate, quite detailed into my dissertation and into my year at GSK, what I was doing there. Some typical interview questions like how name a time you overcame a problem. So those sort of probing questions. And then once I got through for that and they selected me for the PhD, I had to go to my funding interview for the NRDTP program through BBSRC. And that was a panel of 4 people, I think. That was more intense, but they were really welcoming. They were very nice. They asked a lot about my previous research, a lot about my dissertation. Again, there were sort of like typical interview questions like your best skill or what you think you'll find hard, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But they also asked me specific techniques out of the PhD project and really grilled me on stuff that I had never done before to make sure I had read up and really understood what I was actually about to do, which was probably the harder part to prepare for as I hadn't done it in the lab yet.
True. Yeah. Just reading about it does not help because you actually don't perceive how it will be in practical. I mean, those
Yeah.
tiny things that we overlook when we just read the theory only come in handy when we start doing the practicals. So,
Yeah.
I mean, getting questions on such sort is definitely difficult. But just tell us more about how was your experience as you transitioned from your undergrad degree to PhD? Because most often, many people don't do this. They have a master's degree in between. So,
Yeah.
want to know your opinion on that and how was it for you? What were the difficult things? But also, I'm sure you have an advantage, like especially time of 2 years that you could save there. So, yeah.
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was 4 years with the industry year. So
Yes.
the reason I could go straight across was because they viewed that industry year as me gaining a fairly similar amount um, of lab experience to a master's. But as I now help master's students with their projects and I teach them in the lab, it was very, very different. I didn't have as much input into my project as a master's student did. And also, the things I was doing, we knew worked. Like we knew the lab protocol worked. Everything was already set up in a really nice, streamlined fashion. You don't always get that as a master's student. And that's probably what I struggled the most with coming into my PhD, trying to organize and make these protocols to work for my system and just hitting a lot of barriers. I hadn't really experienced things and experiments not working before. So all of my undergraduate, I'd been very lucky. My dissertation, my work, everything had worked. So when I started my PhD, nothing I touched worked. So I really struggled with that. So I think in one way, having that master's, because you are doing more academic research in the master's in that way, and that aspect is a bit more open and a bit less known.
You to this, like something which in the future, it makes you ready for that.
Yeah. So I think I found it a really big jump personally, which I was a little unprepared for. And I did struggle to find my feet straight away on my PhD. It took me quite a few months to settle in, and the confidence took a really long time to come in from that. Whereas I know some other people with masters, they didn't find it as difficult. And also it helps you figure out if you do really like the lab, which would be quite helpful to know before you decide on a 4-year journey. But also I didn't want to take an extra year to then come into the PhD. I was like, I'll just get out of the way. But,
that's quite challenging and brave. Yeah, it's quite brave of you that you took that step. But this is out of my curiosity that I want to know that what kept you going, because you said that when you started your PhD, none of those experiments were working. But what was that kept you motivated? Because this is where a lot of us fail. So I'm curious to know through your experience, what was it that kept you going?
So I think it was the fact that I was quite determined to show that I was capable of doing a PhD, because I felt like everyone was like, she doesn't know what she's doing, she's useless in the lab. So I really wanted to overcome that view, which one of the hardest parts to overcome that was actually myself, because I didn't think I could do it, which that's the biggest hurdle you need to overcome, really. It's not other people's views. The instant my confidence grew, I became much better. But I lived with some other PhD students. They were actually really supportive of me, and they've become some of my closest friends now. And they encouraged me to actually talk to my supervisor. Once I was open with my supervisor about how I was feeling, we sat down and had a talk, and then she actually gave me some other stuff to do that was more likely to work, so that I could start making progress and feel like I was doing things that were working and I was making progress in my project. So it was actually really helpful for me going to my supervisor. I actually wish I'd spoken to her earlier, but I know that may not be the case for everyone, but that is what I found. My supervisor and my friends, family was super helpful as well. They were all, everyone from home was just like, you can do this, don't quit, you can finish this. So that was really nice to have all of that backing, especially when I thought I couldn't do it. I do think it was mainly my friends that were like, you can do this, like, let's just talk about what's going on. I'd say talking is absolutely key to figuring everything out.
Thanks for sharing this, because I haven't spoken to many people who have transitioned from their undergraduate degree to PhD. And this is something that we, as people who have transitioned from undergrads to masters and then to a PhD, wouldn't comment on. And this really needs a first-hand experience, which you went through. So I mean, you really shed some, told us about some very important points that you followed through, and also the support that you got. I mean, really highlights how important it is to have a good working environment, and at the same time, a support from your family and friends. So I think this is one of the greatest takeaways from your interviews, definitely, especially for somebody who's transitioning from their undergrads to PhD and probably is in the same situation right now. Okay.
Yeah, it's a big scary jump.
Yeah, but we'll all, overcome this. So
yeah, definitely.
All right. So I asked you about your PhD interview, and so what are your plans after your PhD? I know that you were mentioning briefly about that you are not too much into the lab work now.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, after your PhD, so what have you thought of as of now? This is not the right question to ask every student, I'm sure, especially if you're finishing. But if you have some plan.
Yeah, I am trying to explore the science communication. So my supervisor is really hounding me to look at available jobs, which I will definitely be doing soon, just in case she watches this. So I'm definitely trying to get on board and like see what's actually out there, because it's quite hard figuring out what you want to do if you're not entirely sure what is available to you. So I am still quite exploring ideas, but I really want something where communication probably is quite centered to that and me working with people. But I don't really want to lose the science. I want the science incorporated into that still. I think that's still quite important for me.
Yeah, and it's also important that people who are involved in science communication, they understand science, because if a layman is going to do science communication, then probably it will not be that effective. So there's often, there's the huge gap between what scientists want to say and what the journalists say. So
Yeah.
we need to bridge this gap between science and journalism, so sort of bring a more of valid scientific journalism into place. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.